Well, we're looking today and over the next few weeks at a letter that's part of the Bible. A letter written to some Christians around 2,000 years ago or so, but with loads to say to us today. It's called Hebrews, and we had a look at the earlier part of the letter a little while ago here at Carlisle Baptist, and we're starting again at chapter 12, and Laura is going to come and read us the first 3 verses from there.
Today's reading is from Hebrews chapter 12, and it can be found on page 1332 in the Church Bible. Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great crowd of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders, and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of faith. For the joy that was set before him, he endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider him who endured such opposition from sinners, so that you will not grow weary and lose heart.
Well, I think most of the people dropping off have drifted back now, so We'll get going. A warm welcome. Let me add my welcome to Andrews. My name's Peter Walkinshaw. I'm the pastor here at the church. If we've not met, it'd be great to say hello over a cuppa in a little while at the end of the formal part of our time together. Now, as has already been mentioned, we're starting a new series. Over the next 6 weeks or so, we're going to be looking at this final section of the book of Hebrews. It's actually a couple of years, I think, since we were in Hebrews, and we finished off at the end of chapter 11. I hope it's going to be a useful series for us, and I'll tell you why. Now, I should just say, I know it's not Easter. It's not Easter. It's September. But I wonder if you've ever considered who was against Jesus at his crucifixion. The government were against him. Pilate and Herod were both conspiring against him. The religious authorities were against him. The Pharisees were plotting to have him killed. The educated elite in that society, we could roughly call them the Sadducees, but they were the educated elite, thought themselves very clever. They were very much against Jesus. The mainstream media, well, they didn't really have TV and radio back then, did they? But the opinion formers in society, well, it's the list of above, isn't it? So Pilate, Herod, the Romans, the Jewish authorities, the religious authorities, the educated elite, that were who were trying to form opinions in wider society. That the whole flow of that is against Jesus. And even just before Jesus is crucified, there's a crowd of just gathered people who are whipped up by all of this, shouting, "Crucify him." Now, why do I mention this? I do know it's not Easter. Why do I mention who was against Jesus? Well, I think being a Christian in the UK in 2023, it can sometimes, in a small way, feel a bit similar. The government, the religious authorities, the educated elite, mainstream media, even the crowd, regular people, don't always have warm, fuzzy feelings towards people of faith generally, Christians maybe in particular, seen as some sort of antiquated minority, perhaps with views that would be, and beliefs that would be more suited to the medieval period. So sometimes it can feel hard faced by all that. John chapter 16 says to us, beware, speaking to Christians, beware, or followers of Jesus anyway, beware when all men speak well of you. Beware when all men speak well of you. And we might feel, well, we've got that bit right, haven't we? There's not many people speaking well of us. And it can be hard. Well, I think that's one of the reasons why it's going to be great for us to look at the book of Hebrews, or these final couple of chapters of Hebrews over the coming weeks, It's a great book of encouragement. The whole thing is designed to be an encouragement to people following Jesus, and we've seen many encouragements from it. But this last section, I think, is going to be encouragement to us as we navigate a world that is in some ways hostile towards Christians and our beliefs. Well, I've got a little summary of what has just gone before, because you might notice that chapter 12 starts with the word therefore. So it's important for us to know what's just come before. The whole chapter, chapter 11, is this great chapter of faith, picking out lots of people who were great heroes of faith, named individuals from the Old Testament, famous names like Abraham and Moses, that it talks about as great people of faith. But then towards the end of the chapter is summarize it a bit more in verses 32 to 40, which I've attempted to summarize on here. It says, through faith, some of them quenched the power of fire. They were chucked into fires and didn't perish. Escaped the edge of the sword, were made strong out of weakness, became mighty in war, put foreign armies to flight. Others, however, suffered mocking and flogging, even chains and imprisonment. They were stoned, they were sawn in two, they were killed with the sword. So you've got two sort of pictures of these people of faith. Great accomplishments, saw God do incredible things through them and in their lifetime, but some had an incredibly hard path to follow. It's interesting to think, isn't it? I presume they were all praying similar prayers to God, asking for his help, asking for it not to be hard. But they had faith to continue, and sometimes when we can't see the bigger picture and we don't understand why is it so difficult, they continued. Well, that's what we have seen in the previous chapter. We haven't got time to read it now, but I would encourage you to read it. It is a tremendously encouraging chapter. It actually sort of starts in the second half of the chapter before with some great encouragements to faith. But we're now coming to chapter 12, is building on that. And I've got, in these first few verses, I've got three things I particularly want us to see. And we're going to look and think about what this says about how to win a race. It could be useful in all kinds of ways. I know, school sports day. But particularly think about the race which is the Christian life. We're going to think about how you teach a new dog old tricks. I know that's not the phrase. The phrase is how do you teach, or you can't teach an old dog new tricks. That's the phrase, isn't it? But we're going to think about how you teach a new dog old tricks. And we're going to think about following the trailblazer, thirdly. Okay, first of those, how to win a race. Well, there's some top tips in these verses on how to win a race. In verse 1, I think there's 5 things here that for us to notice. And the first one is to run. If you're in a race, run, don't walk. So run, get going, and don't stop. You notice it says, in the second half of that verse, let us run with perseverance. Run and persevere. So don't stop. Keep going. A few years ago, me and my family were on holiday in Scotland, and we decided to climb the mountain Ben Nevis. It wasn't a race, although it did feel like it at times. We made it up and we made it down, although most people made it down. I almost made it back. I got to really quite close to the car park. I would say, if you think about the length of this road out here, I was probably about twice that length away from the car. If there hadn't been trees in the way, I could have seen the car. I was really good. And I just couldn't walk anymore. We'd been up and down this mountain. I just had to sit down on the grass. My legs were just like jelly. And I just thought, I'm not sure I can make it. In fact, I think if it hadn't been for my amazing wife, who skipped back down the path and took me by the arm and dragged me the last bit. I think I'd still be there. When we got to the car, it felt so good to get the boots off. But I couldn't drive the car. I'd driven there. I couldn't drive home. My legs were like, it was like some sort of octopus or something. But I just couldn't persevere. I couldn't persevere. But Mrs. Walkinshaw could. She has great stamina. She persevered. She helped me to persevere. If you are trying to do a race, some tremendous race like a marathon or something, it's no good stopping at 19 miles, is it? You're never going to win. You've got to persevere. You've got to keep going. And in the race that is the Christian life, we've got to keep going. We've got to keep going. It's not dawdle. It's not get sidetracked, go off on little side routes. Let us run with perseverance. Keep going. But it's not just that. Notice, so there's our first two really. We've got to run and we've got to persevere. But the third thing, run with perseverance, the race marked out for us. So it's not invent your own route. It's the race marked out for us. Sometimes there are races around Carlisle, and our road along to our house, we live on Brampton Road, our road along to our house is one of the popular routes. It's not unusual, often on a Sunday morning actually when we come to church, to see signs have gone up. Sometimes people in high vis are there and pointing people into the park or out of the park, or which side of the road they're to run on or whatever. And it's all marked out. There are big signs. Go this way, don't go that way, turn here. Don't go on this bit of the road. There's sometimes cones, the cars are on this bit, you've got to run on this bit or whatever. And you can't just decide you'll take a shortcut. Oh, the route goes round there, but it's much quicker if I just nip over here. You'd be disqualified, wouldn't you? The race route is marked out, and so in the Christian life, we don't make it up as we go along. There is a direction to go, a route marked out for us. So we're running the race. We're doing it with perseverance. It's a race marked out for us. And then, just a little bit before that, it also says, let us throw off everything that hinders. You don't see many people competing in the Olympics, 400 metres hurdles or something, wearing a massive fur coat and hobnail boots. You don't, do you? They're all in their like skimpy outfits and stuff and lycra because they want to get rid of anything that might hinder them. Now, you might have been wondering, what are those things on the screen here? And apparently, some people, when they're training, do weights on their ankles or wrists, like if you're running, have these weights that you can attach to yourselves or doing exercise, and you can attach these weights to make it harder. Sounds madness, isn't it? I'm going to do a run, but I'm going to make it harder for myself. I'm going to strap extra weights to myself while I'm training. If you were trying to compete at the top level, I understand why you might want to do that. But of course, you don't keep them on for the actual event. The whole idea is you make it harder in the training so it doesn't feel as hard in the actual event. If you can complete the distance in a certain time with these strapped around your body, then presumably without them, you can do it better. You chuck off what hinders. And running the Christian life, we don't want to be hindered. We don't want things that are going to weigh us down. We don't want the spiritual equivalent of boots and woolly jumpers, do we? Things that might slow us down. Now, there might be things that are okay things, good things even, but things that are going to distract and take us away from running the race. And that leads us to my fifth thing. Throw off everything that hinders, verse 1, and the sin that so easily entangles. Sin entangles us. It ensnares us. Sin saps our strength, our ability to compete the race. Our ability to run. Could help us to run as we try and run away from it, but we don't want to get entangled by it. Now, I was thinking about this idea of how sin entangles us. I don't think it's really sort of, make sure your shoelaces are tied tight because you don't want the lace getting wrapped around your foot and it might trip you up. I think it's more like this image here, which we've got on the screen. This is, if you've not seen the film, you won't know what this is. But in one of the Lord of the Rings films, it's actually a Hobbit film, I think. These characters in the forest stumbled into this area, which, and for some people this is absolutely terrifying, is inhabited by ginormous, huge spiders. Like spiders that are a couple of meters long. There was a massive panic in our house last night about a spider that was this big. But these spiders are absolutely ginormous, and they've set these massive webs, and these warriors have accidentally stumbled into it and ended up covered in spider's web. I think this is part of the filming of that scene. It's not a very high quality picture, I'm sorry. But when they were filming that scene, this is some of the makeup, special effects or whatever that they had on them to look like spiders' webs. But in the film, they get all tangled up in this. The spiders are going to eat them. They're trapped. It's all sticky and horrible. And I think that's a better image of how sin entangles us. It's not like a shoelace getting wrapped around your ankle. It will absolutely get a grip on you and stop you being able to run. So, run with perseverance, run the race that's marked out, not just some route you invent. Chuck off what hinders, and especially sin that so easily entangles. Well, that's how to run a race, generally, but how to run the race of the Christian life. That's the first of my three things. It's maybe slightly shorter than some of the others, but we're going to move on to the second one. How to teach an old dog new tricks. I wonder, how to teach a new dog old tricks. I said it wrong, didn't I? I wonder if you've ever seen the TV programme Strictly Come Dancing. If you've not, don't worry about ever seeing it. But on that programme, people who we are told are celebrities, are on the, some of them you've heard of, but they compete. They learn that it's normally people who can't dance, although some of them seem pretty good. But they are learning how to dance and they're competing with others. And on that programme, they are watched by experts. There's some expert dancers who watch their dancing and give them marks on how they're doing. But they're also watching experts. Each one of them is paired up with an expert who can teach them and show them what to do and demonstrate the moves or whatever. So they are both watched by experts and they are watching experts, if you know what I mean. Now I think that is the idea that's here in verse 1. Do you see how it starts? Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses. Do you remember I said in the previous chapter, it's talked about all these great heroes of faith in the Old Testament. And you could read that line to sound like, because we're being watched by experts, then we need to run this race, throw off what hinders, persevere, etc. Since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, these people who've gone before are watching us, and they were experts. We've just been told how they're great people of faith. But I think it's not just that they're watching us, and perhaps it's not even primarily that they're watching us, but we're surrounded by a great crowd of witnesses. They bear witness to how to run the life of faith. So it's that we watch them, we see how they have run, how they have come before us. As we read the stories of their lives and what God did in their day with their sometimes small amount of faith, we can take great encouragement from that. So we're watching the experts, not just being watched by the experts, and that is going to help us to run this race. When I was at Bible College down in London, the principal of the college then was a great man called David Peterson. He was just a very wise guy. Being in his lectures were always a great highlight. He was a brilliant man. He's actually written a Bible commentary, a book all about the book of Hebrews. And I was struck by something he said about this. He said, think of it this way, since we're surrounded by such a great crowd of witnesses, it's what we see in them, not what they see in us. It's what we see in them, not what they see in us. It's always easier to do something if somebody's gone before. I wonder if you've ever done something like this. This is a high ropes course. This is actually, I think it's called Go Ape. It's down in Winlatter Forest, I think, this one. And it's really high up in the trees. They built this thing really high up in the trees. There's these ropes fastened together. And as you might be able to see, these boards you're going to walk on are like hanging on ropes, and they wobble all over the place. And there's various different challenges and things you've got to sort of negotiate. And if you're doing it in a group, my recommendation is don't go first. Unless you're someone like Greg or someone, or Joseph, or some brave people in our church, don't we? But unless you're somebody like that, don't go first. Allow other people to go first. Watch what they do. That might be learn from their mistakes. But the great thing is, if they've got across, it's possible. It can be done. Somebody has done it. I've just watched somebody not fall to their death. It can be done. It's a great encouragement. They are bearing witness to the fact that the thing can support your weight. So they might turn around, when they get to the other end, they might turn around and watch us do it. But the important thing is not that they see us do it, but we've seen them do it. That's the thing that will give us great encouragement as we see those who've gone before. Well, I think this is the idea here. We're surrounded by a great crowd of witnesses. They're bearing witness to us of God's faithfulness. Not that they were amazing, but that God was able to do amazing things through them. It's not just people in the Bible. It's not just the people, the named individuals here, Abraham, Moses, etc., who we might know from the previous chapter. Some of the folk who get mentioned, that bit that I summarised at the start, they're unnamed individuals. It's just people he talks about who've gone before. And at this point in 2023, we look back not just to the Bible, but to many Christian individuals who went before. It's a great thing to do as a Christian, to read Christian biographies of Christians who came before. They can be very inspiring and encouraging. Sometimes those individuals are unknown to us. But have you ever thought there was somebody who was the first ever Christian to arrive in Carlisle? At one time there were no Christians here. Nobody had ever heard the good news about Jesus. And somebody rocked up who was the first believer in Christ Jesus. It's an unnamed individual, isn't it? We don't know who that person is. Some people say St. Cuthbert, but I suspect it was probably some Roman soldier or something who'd been stationed here at Hadrian's Wall. We don't know, but at some point, somebody said we need to start a church in Carlisle. At some point in history, some great hero of the faith. It's a bit difficult to look to their to be inspired by them, because we know so little. We know that that person must exist, but we don't know much about them. But there are people whose lives we can read about throughout 2,000 years of church history. So sometimes pretty ordinary people, sometimes real high flyers, but there's people who we can look to who are also witnesses to God's faithfulness. Even in our own church life, there's some individuals who started this church. In fact, we know their names. Here's a list of names. On the 31st of October, 1880, I've showed this slide before. You might have seen this slide before. This chap, Alfred Saville, gathered together in Fisher Street, Carlisle, which still exists as a street. He gathered together these individuals, and they all wrote their names on a piece of paper that we still have, or their names are recorded in a book, a piece of paper that we have from that time, and said that they together were going to form this church. Those individuals committed to working hard to establish a church. And that was 1880, and by 1888 they were opening this building that we're in now. We know almost nothing about any of these people. I mean, somebody could do research if you had a lot of time on your hands. But we know very little about any of these people, but we can be inspired by their faith, stepping out in faith and saying, no, there's a need for more gospel witness in this city. We might be able to think more personally about those who told us the gospel. Those who maybe went out of their way, maybe at great personal cost, told us the gospel, or made it possible for us to hear the gospel. Maybe for a long time prayed for us before we understood and were able to respond to the gospel. People who came before. How do you teach a new dog old tricks? Well, you could look at an old dog doing the trick. An old dog that's done it before. Somebody who's done it before. Some of the things that they teach us, though, are that it's not always easy. There can be painful things that come in our lives, that we see in the lives of people who've gone before. But we can also learn that painful things don't mean that God has abandoned us. We can learn that pain is not meaningless. That the difficulties you're facing are not random, but can actually be for your good. We can learn that they can help your holiness to grow. Your righteousness can be good for your soul, can help you grow in faith, even if we don't see why. There's that and many other great lessons we can see. And this verse points us to that truth. Well, let's move on to the third thing I wanted us to see from these verses, and it's how to follow the trailblazer. A few years ago, I read a book all about Henry Morton Stanley. Here's a statue of him. He's from this little town in North Wales. You might have heard me talk about him before. He was an explorer and spent a lot of time exploring in Africa, looking for the source of the Nile, which was a great obsession back in those days, and the source of the great river Congo, a ginormous river that runs through the centre of Africa. He conducted this great expedition between 1874 and 1877, went right across the heart of Africa, from the east side to the west. He crossed right across. This is, I think, an advert for chocolate, but on a sort of postcard or something. But there's a picture of him, and it's talking about this expedition, and you can see there the route. He did a bit of doubling back because he didn't know where he was going. It took him, they eventually got to the sea on the west side after 999 days. It's amazing. If they'd just been a bit slower, it would have been 1,000 days. But 999th day they got there. I wonder if they did a sprint in the last few days to make sure it wasn't 1,000. I don't know. But anyway, after 999 days they got there. He'd started with 228 people, and he got there with 114. That's exactly half. And maybe if they hadn't sped up on that last bit, a few more would have survived. I don't know. But maybe they had to leave him behind. I don't know. It was a really hard thing, and he was celebrated in the West as having, discovered what was going on in the middle of Africa. I think there would have been a bunch of Africans saying, "We're already here. We know what's going on in the middle of Africa." But anyway, to Europeans and Westerners, it was a mystery, and he crossed Africa back in those days. But he was a man who was kind of obsessed, I think really with fame, but obsessed with exploring and going where nobody had gone before. He had his eyes on the goal of being the first white person really, to cross from one side to the other. He actually himself said that he wouldn't have been able to do it if it hadn't been for a group of 20 native porters, so Africans, who really enabled it to happen. Having blazed that trail, he made it easier for others to follow. And it turns out that wasn't always a good thing for the people who lived there in the middle, but he made it easier for others to follow. He's quite a controversial figure. He also invented the pith helmet. I think in that statue picture, he's holding the helmet he invented. Is that on the next slide? See that helmet, that sort of roundy helmet that explorers always have? He invented that. There you go. He had his eyes fixed on the goal. He wanted to get there. Can you imagine? 999 days over very difficult terrain. Half the people you set out with have died or have abandoned you or have got ill and you've had to leave them behind or whatever. He kept going. He was a very driven individual, not necessarily for very good reasons. He's also famous for meeting Dr. Livingstone, who's a Christian missionary who sort of got lost in the middle of Africa. I think that's why in the statue he's holding out his hand, because he famously said Dr. Livingstone, I presume, when he met him in the middle of Africa and they shook hands. Very formal, sort of Victorian greeting. But he was single-minded. That's the point. He was single-minded. He was trying to blaze a trail. Now, we've just been reminded from these verses that we're running a race. We've got this cloud of witnesses who are inspiring us, but we have a secret weapon. And it's not a pith helmet, like or our 20 porters that we have carrying all our stuff for us. We have a secret weapon, and it's in verse 2. Fixing our eyes on Jesus. Fixing our eyes on Jesus. That's the thing that's going to help us. Following the trailblazer, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer, the one who's gone ahead, and the perfecter of our faith. Jesus, when it comes to Christian life, is the one who's blazed the trail, isn't he? He's the one who's done all the hard work. He's the one who started our journey, made it possible for us to be on the Christian journey as we put our faith and trust in him. He's the one that's enabled it through his death and resurrection, enabled our sins to be forgiven, enabled a fresh start with God. You might know other versions sometimes say rather than the pioneer of our faith, the author of our faith. The one who's written it, really. The one who's enabled it to be possible. The one from whom it came. But he's not just the one who started it, but the one who can perfect it, the one who can knock off our rough edges, that can help us grow in faith. Stanley was a very flawed individual. If you read his life story, he's a very flawed individual, particularly by today's standards, but I think even by the standards of his day, he was not a particularly pleasant guy, but he was very driven. Jesus is the most admirable individual that ever walked this earth. We look to him and we see someone that is worth following. Someone who's done something extraordinary in blazing the trail he sort of enabled us to follow. But where will we see him? We're to look to him. Where will we see him? Well, we'll see him in the gospel accounts as we see him in action. We see what he's doing, what he's saying, including seeing how he goes to the cross. But verse 2 says, not only do we see him enduring the cross, not worrying about the shame that appeared to bring, but we also see where he is now, sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. So not only has he blazed the trail, not only did he go to the cross, but he's resurrected and he sat there at the Father's right hand, the place of honour, and he's sitting, indicating job done. Job done. He's blazed the trail. He's able to sit back when it's finished. We just need to follow the trail, fix our eyes on him, run the race of the Christian life, so to speak. The race marked out for us. With Jesus as the starting point, as we put our faith in Jesus, that's the starting gun going, isn't it? With him as a great example, verse 3, consider him who endured such opposition from sinners. Loads of opposition. We thought about at the very start, didn't we? All these groups that were opposed to him. And as we look at his example, we won't grow weary or lose heart. No matter how hard it gets for us running the race of the Christian life, we could never say, Jesus doesn't understand. We could never say, he never had it this hard. So let's be people who have faith. Let's be people who show that we have faith. In a couple of weeks' time, we're going to be having some baptisms here at the church. If you've never been baptized as an adult and you'd like to know a bit more about that, do come and speak to me later. But one of the things that the folk being baptized are going to be doing is they're demonstrating that they have faith. They're going to be saying, I have faith in the Lord Jesus. I have, at some point, started running this race. And as we look at them doing that, they're bearing witness to that, aren't they? And they are an encouragement to all of us. But let's all of us be people of faith. Let's all of us be showing that we have faith if we're trusting Jesus. Let others look to our example. But supremely, let's all look to Jesus Christ. Now, maybe you're new to Christian things, and these things are, you're just grappling with this and thinking about it. We have a short course called Christianity Explored. It enables us to just spend a few weeks looking more closely at Jesus and seeing him in action, his life, what he was doing, and seeing what he achieved in his death. If that's of interest to you, or you have a friend who you think that might be of interest to, do speak to me. Let me pray. Father, we sometimes feel that there's many hard things about the Christian life. We sometimes might feel that the things that we face are extraordinary. Nobody's ever faced them before. Father, we thank you for the great example of many Christians who've gone before. We thank you for many examples from your word. But we thank you supremely for Jesus, for what he achieved in his life, death and resurrection, for how he helps us now. I pray that you would help us to fix our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith. Amen.